But tonight, something made him stop. A weak whimper cut through the engine's roar. In the garbage-strewn alley, a golden retriever puppy lay dying, ribs showing through matted fur, fresh cuts marking its tiny body. Tank had seen plenty of violence, dealt his share of pain, but this innocent suffering hit different. As sirens wailed in the distance and his phone buzzed with orders from the club, he faced an impossible choice. The puppy's trusting eyes looked up at him, and Tank realized this moment would either damn his soul or save it. What happens when the most dangerous man in the city discovers that protecting something pure might cost him everything he's ever known? Tank killed the engine and swung his massive frame off the bike. 6'4" and built like a freight train, he'd earned his nickname the hard way. His hands, scarred from countless fights, trembled as he knelt beside the trembling animal. The puppy couldn't have been more than 8 weeks old, golden fur darkened with mud, and worse things he didn't want to identify. "Jesus, little guy," he whispered, his voice rougher than sandpaper. "What the hell happened to you?" The phone in his pocket buzzed again. 3 missed calls from Razor, the club's president. Tank knew what that meant. Another job, another debt to collect, another reason to remind the streets why crossing the Hells Angels was a mistake people only made once. But the puppy whimpered again, trying to lift its head, and Tank found himself reaching out with fingers that had broken more bones than a mob doctor had set. The animal didn't flinch when Tank's tattooed hand touched its matted fur. Instead, it tried to crawl closer, seeking warmth, seeking help from the only human who'd bothered to stop. Tank had been expecting fear. That's all anything ever showed him anymore. Instead, he got trust, pure and simple, from something that had every reason to hate humans. "Shit," he muttered, carefully scooping the puppy up. It weighed nothing, all bones and wet fur. He could feel its rapid heartbeat against his palm, feel how its breathing came in shallow gasps. This wasn't just abandonment. Somebody had hurt this animal deliberately. The cuts were too precise, too purposeful. His phone rang. Razor's name flashed on the screen. "Tank, where the hell are you?" The voice crackled through the speaker as Tank answered. "We got business at the docks. Tommy Chen's getting cute with his payments again." Tank stared down at the puppy in his arms. Its eyes had closed, but it was still breathing, still fighting. "I'm 20 minutes out," he lied. "Make it 10. And Tank? Chen's been running his mouth about us being soft. Time to remind him we ain't." The line went dead. 20 years. 20 years of being Razor's right hand, of making problems disappear, of earning respect through fear. The club was his family, his brotherhood, his whole damn identity. You didn't just walk away from the Hells Angels. People who tried usually ended up in shallow graves or at the bottom of the bay. But this puppy wasn't asking him to walk away from anything. It was just asking not to die alone in a dirty alley. Tank tucked the animal inside his leather jacket, feeling its tiny body shiver against his chest. His Harley roared to life, and he pulled out of the alley, but instead of heading toward the docks, he turned toward the all-night veterinary clinic on Telegraph Avenue. The clinic's neon sign cast pink light across his weathered face as he pulled into the parking lot. Through the window, he could see Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to the Tommy Chen he was supposed to be intimidating right about now, working on a German shepherd. She was young, probably early 30s, with kind eyes and steady hands. Tank had noticed her before during his rare visits to this part of town. She was the kind of woman who'd cross the street if she saw him coming, the kind who believed in fixing things instead of breaking them. Tonight, he was about to find out if she'd be willing to fix something for the most dangerous man in Oakland. The vet clinic's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Tank sat in the cramped waiting room, his massive frame dwarfing the plastic chair. The puppy lay wrapped in his leather jacket, breathing shallow but steady. Other pet owners gave him a wide berth, probably taking in the patches on his vest, the scars on his knuckles, the general aura of violence that followed him like cologne. Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from the back room, her dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail, white coat spotless despite the late hour. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 35, with intelligent eyes that didn't flinch when they met his. "You're the one who called about the injured puppy?" Tank nodded, carefully lifting the bundle from his lap. "Found her maybe an hour ago. She's in bad shape." Dr. Chen's expression shifted the moment she unwrapped the jacket. Her jaw tightened as she examined the wounds, her gentle hands revealing the full extent of the damage. "This isn't from a car accident," she said quietly. "These are bite marks. Multiple dogs." "Yeah, I figured." She looked up at him sharply. "You know what this is from?" "Fighting ring." Tank's voice was flat, seen enough of them to recognize the signs. Dr. Chen carried the puppy toward the examination room, Tank following despite her not inviting him. "This is evidence of animal cruelty. I have to report this to—" Doc Tank's voice stopped her mid-sentence. "How about we focus on keeping her alive first? Then we can talk about the rest." Something in his tone made her study his face more carefully. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded once and pushed through the swinging doors. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of antiseptic and anxiety. Tank found himself pacing the waiting room, checking his phone, wondering why the hell he cared so much about one dying dog. He'd seen worse things, done worse things, and walked away without a second thought. His phone buzzed. "Text from Ripper. Church meeting tomorrow. 8 p.m. Don't be late." Church meetings were mandatory, sacred even. The brotherhood gathered to discuss business, settle disputes, plan operations. Tank had never missed one in 15 years. He glanced toward the examination room door and felt something twist in his gut. Dr. Chen finally emerged, exhaustion written across her features. "She's stable, barely. The next 20 to 4 hours will tell us if she's going to make it." "Can I see her?" "You can, but she's heavily sedated. She won't know you're there." Tank followed her into a recovery room where the puppy lay on a small table, connected to an 4, most of her body wrapped in bandages. She looked impossibly small, impossibly fragile. "I've been doing this for 8 years, Dr. Chen said quietly. "I've seen dogs come in from fighting rings before. Usually they're so traumatized they can't be rehabilitated. This one," she paused, "this one was used as bait, a practice dummy for the fighters." Tank's hands clenched into fists. What kind of sick bastard? The kind that sees animals as commodities. Disposable entertainment. Dr. Chen's voice carried its own edge of anger. "There's a ring operating somewhere in the city. This is the 3rd bait dog I've treated this year. You report it to the cops?" "Of course. They take statements, file reports, say they're investigating. Nothing ever comes of it. These operations move around, stay ahead of law enforcement. Long recovery. Probably need several more surgeries. Physical therapy. And that's just the body. The psychological trauma." She shrugged helplessly. "I'll be honest with you. Most people would recommend putting her down. It would be kinder. But you don't think so?" Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. "There's something about her. A fighter's spirit. She didn't give up out there in that alley. She was still trying to crawl somewhere safe when you found her." Tank reached out tentatively and let his finger brush against the puppy's exposed paw. Her skin was warm, real, alive despite everything she'd endured. "What's this going to cost?" he asked. "For everything? Realistically? Several $1,000s, maybe more if complications arise." Tank pulled out his wallet and dropped $500 bills on the counter. "That's a start. I'll cover whatever it takes." Dr. Chen stared at the money, then at him. "Can I ask why? You don't strike me as the type who usually rescues stray animals." Tank considered the question. He thought about his reputation, his crew, the life he'd built on violence and intimidation. He thought about brotherhood and loyalty and all the things that were supposed to matter most. "Maybe I'm tired of being the type I usually am," he said finally. Outside, his Harley roared to life, cutting through the night silence. Tank sat for a moment before pulling out of the parking lot, the weight of tomorrow's church meeting heavy on his mind. The Harley's engine rumbled like controlled thunder as Tank pulled into the gas station, the little terrier mix pressed against his chest inside his leather jacket. The pup had stopped whimpering during the ride, but Tank could feel its tiny heart hammering against his ribs. Every few seconds, those dark eyes would peek out, scanning the world with a mixture of fear and curiosity that reminded Tank uncomfortably of his own childhood. He'd grown up in neighborhoods where mercy was a luxury few could afford, where showing weakness got you eaten alive. The Hell's Angels had given him purpose, brotherhood, a place where his size and willingness to hurt people made him valuable. But sitting in that fluorescent-lit parking lot with a dying animal against his chest, Tank felt something he hadn't experienced in years, uncertainty about who he really was. The veterinary clinic Dr. Sarah Chen had recommended was only 10 minutes away, but as Tank revved the engine, his phone buzzed with a text from Razor. Church meeting moved up. 8 p.m. tonight, mandatory. Tank glanced at his watch, 7:15. If he took the dog to the vet now, he'd miss the meeting entirely. Missing church without permission wasn't just breaking club rules, it was disrespect that could cost him his patch, or worse. The puppy shifted against him, a small whimper escaping as they hit a pothole. Tank's jaw tightened. 20 years ago, Marcus Morrison had been a scared kid with bruises that social workers never quite saw. The angels had saved him from that life, given him strength, respect, fear. But they'd also taught him that loyalty meant never questioning orders, never putting anything above the brotherhood. The vet clinic appeared ahead, its warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. Tank pulled into the parking lot and killed the engine, his hands trembling slightly as he carefully extracted the puppy from his jacket. The little animal looked even smaller in the harsh lighting, its breathing shallow and labored. "Stay with me, little guy," Tank whispered, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. "Just a little longer." The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and fear. An elderly woman clutched a cat carrier while a teenager sat opposite her, cradling what looked like an injured rabbit. They both glanced up when Tank entered, 6'4" of leather and muscle, and their expressions shifted from curiosity to barely concealed alarm. Tank was used to that reaction, had cultivated it for years. Tonight, it just made him feel tired. The receptionist, a young woman with purple hair and kind eyes, didn't flinch when he approached. "Can I help you?" "Found this pup in an alley," Tank said quietly, adjusting his hold so she could see the terrier's face. "It's hurt bad. Dr. Chen said to bring him here." Her expression softened immediately. Sarah called ahead. "Let me get Dr. Martinez." She disappeared through a door marked "Staff Only," returning moments later with a tall Hispanic man in scrubs. "I'm Dr. Martinez," the vet said, extending his hand without hesitation. Tank shook it, noting how the man's eyes went immediately to the puppy rather than his Hell's Angels patches. "Let's take a look at our patient." They moved into an examination room where Dr. Martinez began a gentle assessment. Tank found himself answering questions about where he'd found the dog, what condition it had been in, whether he'd seen any other animals in the area. The vet's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking for broken bones, examining the infected wounds along the puppy's legs and muzzle. "These injuries are consistent with animal fighting," Dr. Martinez said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "The pattern of bites, the way they've been left untreated, this little one was likely used as a bait dog." Tank's hands clenched into fists. Bait dog? They use smaller, gentler animals to train fighting dogs, teach them to be aggressive. The vet's jaw tightened. It's barbaric, but unfortunately common in underground fighting rings. The words hit Tank like physical blows. Someone had deliberately tortured this innocent animal, used its gentle nature against it, turned it into a victim for profit and entertainment. The same kind of predatory cruelty he'd witnessed growing up, dressed up in different clothes. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Razor. "Where the hell are you?" Tank stared at the message, then at the puppy lying so trustingly on the examination table. Dr. Martinez was explaining treatment options, mentioning surgery, antibiotics, the long road to recovery ahead. The vet seemed to assume Tank would be responsible for all of it, that the man who'd brought in this broken animal would see it through to healing. "Can you save him?" Tank asked. "With time and care, yes, but it won't be cheap, and he'll need someone committed to his recovery." Tank thought about the club meeting, about 20 years of brotherhood and loyalty. Then he looked at those trusting dark eyes and made his choice. "Do whatever it takes," he said. "I'll handle the cost." The veterinary clinic smelled like disinfectant and fear. Tank sat in the cramped waiting room, his massive frame making the plastic chair creak ominously. The puppy, now wrapped in one of his old t-shirts, wheezed softly against his chest. Every shallow breath felt like a countdown. Morrison? A young woman in scrubs appeared, clipboard in hand. Her eyes widened slightly when she took in his leather vest and the patches that told his story in symbols most people couldn't read. "Dr. Chen will see you now." The examination room was blindingly white. Tank placed the puppy gently on the metal table, watching as a small Asian woman with kind eyes and steady hands began her assessment. She worked in silence, her fingers probing carefully, listening with her stethoscope, shining lights into the pup's eyes. "What's his name?" she asked, without looking up. Tank realized he hadn't thought about it. "Don't know yet." Dr. Chen glanced at him, taking in the contradiction of this hulking man, speaking so softly to a dying animal. "Well, he's lucky you found him. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, and these wounds," she indicated the scarring around the puppy's face and legs, "these are consistent with dogfighting. This little guy was probably used as bait." The words hit Tank like a physical blow. He'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made his hands clench into fists. "Can you save him?" "I'm going to try, but I have to ask. Do you know where he came from? Because if there's a fighting operation running, there are probably other animals suffering." Tank's phone buzzed. "A text from Reaper, church tonight. Mandatory. We got business to discuss." "I might," Tank said carefully. "If I did, what would happen?" Dr. Chen's expression hardened. "I'd have to report it. It's my legal obligation, and frankly, my moral one too." She paused, studying his face. "You're not involved in that world, are you?" Before Tank could answer, his phone rang. Reaper's name flashed on the screen. Tank declined the call, but Dr. Chen had noticed his hesitation. "Look," she said, "I don't know you, and honestly, you're not what I expected when my night shift assistant said a biker brought in an injured puppy. But this little guy is going to need extensive care. Surgery, antibiotics, weeks of recovery. It's going to be expensive, and there's no guarantee." Tank pulled out his wallet, extracting a thick roll of bills. "Money's not a problem." Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose. That's very generous. But he'll need more than money. He'll need someone who cares, who'll be patient with him. Dogs used for bait often have trust issues. "I can do that." She studied him for a long moment. "Okay then, I'll prep him for surgery. It'll take several hours. You might want to go home, get some rest." Tank shook his head. "I'll wait." Back in the waiting room, Tank's phone buzzed incessantly. Texts from other club members asking where he was, reminding him about church, warning him that Reaper was pissed. Tank turned the phone face down and tried to ignore it. A television in the corner droned quietly, cycling through late-night news. Tank wasn't paying attention until he heard the reporter mention dogfighting. His head snapped up to see footage of animal control officers removing cages from a warehouse across town. "The third such raid this month," the reporter was saying. "Police believe the operations are connected, possibly run by organized crime. The investigation is ongoing, with authorities asking anyone with information to come forward." Tank's blood ran cold. 3 raids, which meant whoever was running these operations was either very careless or very powerful. In his world, when law enforcement started sniffing around, people got nervous. And when people got nervous, they started eliminating problems. His phone rang again. This time he answered. "Where the hell are you?" Reaper's voice was ice-cold fury. "You're missing church for what exactly? Had something to take care of." "Well, untake care of it. We got a situation that needs handling. Some people been talking to cops about business that ain't theirs. Boss wants it cleaned up, quiet like." Tank's mouth went dry. "What kind of business?" The kind that pays for your bike, your house, and your comfortable life. Don't ask stupid questions. Just get your ass down here. We roll in an hour." The line went dead. Tank stared at his phone, his mind racing. The timing couldn't be coincidental. The raids, the emergency meeting, the talk of people talking to cops, it all connected to the same ugly web that had nearly killed the puppy, now fighting for its life in surgery. He thought about the scars on that small body, the pain in those dark eyes. Then he thought about what Reaper expected him to do tonight, what cleaning up usually meant in their world. Tank had always known this day would come, the day when his loyalty to the club would clash with something deeper. He just never imagined it would be a dying puppy that forced his hand. The surgery doors remained closed, and Tank Morrison sat alone with the weight of an impossible choice. The vet clinic's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Tank sat in the plastic chair that groaned under his weight. The puppy, he'd started thinking of her as Runt, lay sleeping in a small kennel beside him, her breathing finally steady after 3 days of touch-and-go recovery. Dr. Sarah Chen had worked miracles, staying late every night to monitor the little survivor. "She's going to make it," Sarah said, emerging from the back room with a tired smile. "Her appetite's back, and the infections are clearing up. Another week of antibiotics and she'll be ready to go home." Home. The word hung in the air between them. Tank's trailer wasn't exactly puppy-friendly, and bringing a dog to the clubhouse would raise questions he wasn't ready to answer. But looking at Runt's peaceful face, he knew he couldn't abandon her now. "What do I owe you?" he asked, reaching for his wallet. Sarah waved him off. "You've already paid enough. Besides, seeing her recover is payment enough for me." Tank studied the young veterinarian. She moved with quiet confidence, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, small hands gentle but sure. Nothing like the bar girls who usually caught his attention. Sarah Chen was different, soft-spoken but unafraid, treating him like a man instead of a monster. "You work late a lot?" he asked. "Occupational hazard. Animals don't keep business hours." She checked Runt's foreline. "Besides, I don't have anywhere else to be." Before Tank could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Diesel, "Church tomorrow, 8 p.m. Don't be late." Church meant club business, the kind that required all patched members present. Tank's jaw tightened. He'd been avoiding the clubhouse since finding Runt, claiming he was working on a bike restoration project. But Diesel's patience had limits. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, noticing his expression. "Yeah, just work stuff." Tank stood, his leather creaking. "I'll be back tomorrow to check on her." "Tank." Sarah's voice stopped him at the door. "Whatever's going on, whatever brought you to that alley, I'm glad you found her. She's lucky to have someone who cares." If only she knew the whole truth. Tank nodded and walked into the night, wondering how long he could keep his two worlds from colliding. The next evening, Tank parked his Harley outside the clubhouse, the familiar rumble of engines and rock music washing over him. Inside, smoke hung thick in the air as brothers clustered around pool tables and the bar. Diesel sat at the head of the scarred wooden table in the back room, his weathered face serious. "Glad you could join us," Diesel said as Tank took his seat. The sarcasm wasn't lost on anyone. 12 patched members filled the room, faces Tank had known for years. These men were his family, bound by blood and brotherhood. But as Diesel began talking about territorial disputes and enforcement runs, Tank found his mind wandering to a small kennel at a vet clinic across town. "Which brings us to our other opportunity," Diesel was saying. "Kruger's dog operation is expanding, wants us to provide security for his events." Tank's attention snapped back. "What kind of events?" "The profitable kind," laughed Brick. "A heavy-set member with arms like tree trunks. Rich bastards love watching dogs tear each other apart. Easy money for standing around looking intimidating." The room erupted in approving murmurs, but Tank felt sick. Dogfighting, the very thing that had probably destroyed Runt before she ended up in that alley. He thought of her trusting eyes, the way she'd finally stopped flinching when he reached for her. "I'm in," said Tommy, a younger prospect eager to prove himself. "When do we start?" Next Friday, Diesel replied. Kruger's setting up something big. High rollers from 3 states. We're talking serious cash. Tank remained silent as the details were hammered out. Security positions, payment splits, protocols for handling law enforcement. Standard club business, but every word felt like a betrayal of the tiny life he'd saved. Tank? Diesel's voice cut through his thoughts. You're quiet tonight. Something on your mind? 12 pairs of eyes turned toward him. These men would die for him, and he for them. But the image of Runt's battered body wouldn't leave his head. How many other dogs would suffer while he stood guard and collected blood money? Just thinking about logistics, Tank said finally. Security's always tricky with that kind of crowd. Diesel nodded approvingly. That's why you're my enforcer. Always thinking ahead. As the meeting broke up and brothers filtered back to the bar, Tank lingered in the empty room. Through the window he could see the city lights stretching toward the clinic where Runt was healing, 2 worlds pulling him in opposite directions. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Runt's eating solid food, tail wagging and everything. She's asking for her daddy. Tank stared at the message until the screen went dark, reflecting only his own conflicted face. The veterinary clinic's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Tank sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, his massive frame making the furniture look like it belonged in a dollhouse. 3 hours had passed since Dr. Sarah Chen had disappeared into the back room with the puppy, and every minute felt like an eternity. His leather jacket creaked as he shifted, drawing disapproving glances from other pet owners who clearly didn't expect to see a Hell's Angels patch in their sterile waiting room. The bell above the entrance chimed, and Tank's blood ran cold. Razor walked through the door, his cold eyes scanning the room until they landed on Tank. Behind him came 2 other angels, Skull and Mad Dog, their presence immediately changing the atmosphere in the clinic. Conversations died, and parents pulled their children closer. Well, well, Razor said, his voice carrying across the room. Look what we got here. Tank Morrison playing house with the civilians. Tank stood slowly, his hands remaining visible and calm. Just taking care of some business, brother. Business? Razor's laugh was sharp and humorless. That what we're calling it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're going soft, playing nursemaid to some worthless mutt. The receptionist behind the desk had gone pale, her hand hovering near what Tank assumed was a panic button. He needed to get this away from innocent people. Let's take this outside, Tank said quietly. Nah, I think here's just fine. Razor stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. See, we got a problem, Tank. Mickey Torino's been asking questions about his missing merchandise. Seems someone scared off his customers last night, cost him a lot of money. Tank's jaw tightened. Don't know what you're talking about. Course you don't. Razor's eyes glittered with malice. But here's the thing, Torino's operation brings in serious cash for the club. Protection money, betting percentages, merchandise sales. You mess with that, you mess with all of us. The back door opened, and Dr. Chen emerged, her surgical scrubs still on. She took in the scene, the 3 bikers surrounding Tank, the terrified faces of her other clients, and her expression hardened. Excuse me, she said firmly, but this is a medical facility. If you're not here for veterinary services, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Razor turned his attention to her, his smile predatory. Well, hello there, Doc. Pretty little thing, aren't you? Must be real nice having Tank here looking out for you. Be a shame if something happened to mess up that arrangement. Tank moved before he could think, putting himself between Razor and Sarah. That's enough. Is it? Razor's hand moved to his belt, where Tank knew he kept a knife. Because from where I'm standing, looks like you've forgotten where your loyalties lie. Maybe you need a reminder about what happens to brothers who betray the club. The tension in the room was suffocating. Tank could feel every eye on them, could sense the fear radiating from the civilians trapped in this confrontation. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably Diesel trying to reach him, but he didn't dare look away from Razor. The puppy survived, Dr. Chen said suddenly, her voice cutting through the standoff. If anyone cares, Tank's heart lurched, relief flooding through him despite the danger. Razor sneered. See what I mean? Look at his face. Our enforcer, going all misty-eyed over some flea bag. Makes me sick. Maybe you should leave, Tank said, his voice carrying a warning that made even Skull take a step back. Razor's expression shifted, recognizing the deadly calm in Tank's tone. You threatening me, brother? I'm telling you to walk away. Now. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Razor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sure thing, Tank. But this isn't over. Torino wants his property back, and he wants compensation for his losses. You got 24 hours to make this right, or we make it right for you. He looked at Dr. Chen. And your new friends might get caught in the crossfire. Razor jerked his head toward the door, and the three bikers filed out, leaving behind a wake of terrified silence. Tank remained standing until their motorcycles roared to life outside and faded into the distance. I'm sorry, he said to Dr. Chen, his voice rough. I'm sorry they threatened you. She studied his face for a long moment. Are you in trouble? Tank almost laughed at the understatement. Yeah. Big trouble. Because of the puppy? Because I'm finally doing something right. He met her eyes. How is she? Really? Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. Touch and go. She's fighting, though, stronger than she looks. She paused. Kind of reminds me of someone else I know. Outside, storm clouds were gathering, and Tank could feel the weight of the approaching reckoning. 24 hours to choose between everything he'd ever known and everything he was learning he could become. The veterinary clinic's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Tank cradled the sleeping puppy against his chest. 3 days had passed since he'd found the broken little creature, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Where once there had been matted fur and fearful whimpers, now soft golden fuzz covered healing wounds, and tiny paws twitched in dreams that Tank hoped were better than the nightmare the pup had escaped. Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from the back room, her scrubs traded for jeans and a soft sweater that made her look younger than her 32 years. She'd been staying late every night, monitoring the puppy's progress with a dedication that went far beyond professional obligation. His blood work came back clean, she said, settling into the chair beside Tank. No infections, no parasites. He's a fighter, this one. Tank's calloused fingers traced the puppy's ears with surprising gentleness. Yeah, he is. Reminds me of someone I used to know. Sarah caught something in his voice, a vulnerability that seemed at odds with the leather vest and intimidating presence. Want to talk about it? Before Tank could answer, his phone buzzed. Razor's name flashed on the screen, and Tank's jaw tightened as he read the message. Church. Tomorrow night. Don't be late. Trouble? Sarah asked, noticing his expression. Maybe. Tank silenced the phone. Look, Doc, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. This fighting ring, how big do you think it is? Sarah's expression darkened. Bigger than you might expect. I've been doing some research since we talked. There are at least 5 other vets in the tri-state area who've reported similar cases. Dogs with fighting injuries, some that didn't make it. She paused, studying his face. Tank, whatever you're thinking of doing? I'm not thinking anything yet. But even as he said it, Tank knew it was a lie. He'd been thinking plenty, and most of those thoughts centered around making someone pay for what had been done to the innocent creature in his arms. The clinic's front door chimed, and both Tank and Sarah looked up to see a small girl with pigtails pressed against the glass, her breath fogging the window as she stared at them with wide eyes. Behind her, a harried-looking woman in a nurse's uniform hurried up the sidewalk. Emma, what did I tell you about wandering off? The woman scolded, but her voice was gentle. The little girl pointed through the window. Mama, look! The big man has a puppy! Tank found himself smiling despite the weight on his shoulders. He stood and walked to the door, opening it carefully. No problem, Tank replied, his voice softer than usual. You want to meet him? His name's... Tank paused, realizing he'd never named the puppy. His name's Hope. The little girl's face lit up as Tank knelt down, bringing the sleepy puppy to her eye level. Her small hand reached out tentatively, and Hope's pink tongue darted out to lick her fingers, eliciting a delighted giggle. "He likes me," Emma whispered. "Course he does," Tank said. "He's got good taste." As the mother and daughter continued on their way, Tank watched them go, something shifting inside his chest. The innocence in that little girl's laughter reminded him of what the world could be when it wasn't poisoned by greed and cruelty. "You're good with kids," Sarah observed as he returned to his seat. "Had a little sister once," Tank said quietly. "Long time ago." The weight of unspoken history hung between them, and Sarah sensed there were depths to Tank Morrison that even he might have forgotten existed. "The fighting ring," Sarah said eventually. "I think I know someone who might have information. A friend of mine works with animal control. She's seen things, heard things. But Tank..." She reached out and touched his arm. "These people, they're dangerous. They don't just hurt animals." Tank's eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her breath catch, not the cold hardness she might have expected, but a fierce protectiveness that burned like a banked fire. "Some things are worth the risk," he said simply. Hope stirred in his arms, tiny paws stretching as the puppy woke. Those dark eyes that had once been filled with terror now looked up at Tank with complete trust, and Tank felt the last of his resistance crumble. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Razor. "This one less patient. We need to talk, now." Tank looked at Sarah, then down at Hope, then at the darkening street beyond the clinic windows. Tomorrow night's meeting would change everything, one way or another. But tonight, for just a little longer, he could pretend that mercy didn't come with a price. "I should go," he said, but made no move to leave. Sarah nodded, understanding more than she said. "We'll be here when you're ready." Tank's hands trembled as he dialed Sarah's number, the small phone feeling foreign in his massive fingers. The puppy, lucky he'd started calling him, was breathing easier now, sleeping peacefully in the makeshift bed Tank had created from an old leather jacket. 3 days had passed since he'd pulled the broken animal from that alley, and somehow everything had changed. "Morrison residence," Sarah answered, her voice professional yet warm. "It's Tank," he said, then caught himself. "Marcus. It's Marcus." A pause. "I was wondering when you'd call. How's our patient?" "Better. Much better. I was thinking..." He stopped, unsure how to ask what he wanted to ask. "Would you like to see him? Maybe grab some coffee?" The silence stretched long enough that Tank wondered if he'd overstepped. He was a Hell's Angel. She was a veterinarian with kind eyes and gentle hands. What was he thinking? "I'd like that," she said finally. "There's a place called Mabel's on 5th Street. Do you know it?" Tank knew it. Neutral territory, away from both the clubhouse and the upscale part of town where someone like Sarah probably lived. 1 hour? Perfect. Tank arrived early, lucky secured in a carrier Sarah had given him. The diner was exactly what he'd expected. Worn vinyl booths, coffee that could strip paint, and waitresses who'd seen everything twice. He chose a corner booth with his back to the wall, old habits dying hard. Sarah walked in wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger somehow, more approachable than she had in her clinic. When she spotted him, her face lit up with a genuine smile that made something tight in Tank's chest loosen. "Let me see him," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. Tank opened the carrier, and Lucky poked his head out, tail wagging tentatively. The transformation was remarkable. The puppy's coat had gained luster, his eyes were bright and alert, and the wounds were healing cleanly. "Marcus, this is incredible," Sarah said, gently stroking Lucky's head. "You've done an amazing job caring for him." The use of his real name still caught him off guard. In his world, he was Tank, a nickname earned through years of being an immovable force, a wall of muscle and intimidation. But when Sarah said Marcus, he remembered who he used to be before the leather and the brotherhood and the violence. "He's a fighter," Tank said, accepting a cup of coffee from the waitress. "Like his rescuer, I imagine." Tank met her eyes. You don't know anything about me. I know you saved a dying puppy when most people would have walked by. I know you've spent the last 3 days nursing him back to health instead of, well, whatever it is you normally do." She paused. "I know you're not what you want people to think you are." Before Tank could respond, his phone buzzed. Text from Diesel: "Church tonight. Mandatory. Big developments." The real world came crashing back. The club, the investigation he was supposed to be conducting, the loyalty he owed to his brothers, even when that loyalty felt like a noose tightening around his neck. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, noticing his expression. Tank shoved the phone back in his pocket. "Tell me about yourself. How does someone end up dedicating their life to helping animals?" Sarah seemed to sense his need to change the subject. She told him about growing up on a farm, about the injured animals she'd brought home as a child, driving her parents crazy. She talked about veterinary school, about opening her clinic, about the satisfaction of healing something that couldn't heal itself. "What about you?" she asked eventually. "What did you want to be when you grew up?" The question hit him like a physical blow. No one had asked him that in years. "A teacher," he said without thinking. "Really?" "History. I used to love reading about battles, about how ordinary people became heroes when the situation demanded it." He laughed bitterly. "Funny how things turn out. It's not too late, you know, to become who you're supposed to be." Tank looked down at Lucky, who had fallen asleep in Sarah's gentle hands. "Sometimes it is. Sometimes you make choices that close certain doors forever." "I don't believe that." Her certainty was both beautiful and naive. She had no idea what those choices were, what he'd done in service to the club, what he might have to do again. The weight of his phone in his pocket seemed to grow heavier. "I should go," he said abruptly. "Club business." Disappointment flickered across Sarah's face, but she nodded. "Will I see you again?" Tank wanted to say yes. He wanted to believe in the possibility she represented, in the man he might become in her presence. But Diesel's text burned in his mind, and he knew the reckoning was coming. "I don't know," he said honestly. As he walked away, carrying Lucky in his carrier, Tank felt like he was leaving more than just a diner. He was leaving behind a glimpse of a different life, a better version of himself that might never get the chance to exist. The warehouse stank of fear, blood, and money. Tank pressed himself against the corrugated metal wall, listening to the roar of voices inside. Through a grimy window, he could see the makeshift arena, a circle of chain-link fencing surrounded by bleachers packed with spectators waving cash and screaming for violence. His stomach churned as 2 pit bulls tore into each other in the center ring, their handlers shouting commands while men in expensive suits placed bets with bookies working the crowd. This was what Charlie had escaped from. This was what would have killed the little pup if Tank hadn't found him that night. "You shouldn't be here." Tank spun around to find Sarah emerging from the shadows, her press badge clipped to her jacket. Her camera hung around her neck, and her face was pale but determined. "Same thing you are, gathering evidence." She held up a small recording device. "I've been documenting this for weeks. Did you think you were the only one who cared about shutting this down?" Inside the warehouse, the crowd erupted in cheers. One of the dogs had gone down and wasn't getting back up. Tank felt his hands clench into fists. "This is dangerous, Sarah. These aren't people you want to mess with." Tank had been dreading this moment, when Sarah would learn that Hell's Angels were deeply involved in the operation, when she'd realized that by helping him, she was potentially destroying his entire life. "Some of them, yeah." His voice was barely audible. "Not all, but enough." Sarah stepped closer, studying his face in the dim light filtering through the warehouse windows. "And you're willing to turn against them?" Before Tank could answer, the sound of motorcycle engines filled the parking lot. He recognized the distinct rumble of Harley Davidsons. His brothers were arriving for the main event. "We need to go. Now." Tank grabbed Sarah's arm, but she pulled away. "Not yet. The big fight hasn't started. That's when the real money changes hands, when they'll bring out the champions." She paused, meeting his eyes. "When they'll bring out the dog they stole from the shelter. The one that's supposed to be dead. Tank's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? Rex, the German shepherd that was supposed to be euthanized last week, the shelter director, Carlson, has been selling dogs that are scheduled to be put down, tells the families their pets were disposed of, then turns them over to the fighting ring. The pieces clicked together in Tank's mind, like a gun being loaded. Charlie came from the shelter too, the day before he was supposed to be executed. Yes. Sarah's voice was steady, but Tank could see the anger burning in her eyes. Carlson's been doing this for months, taking the gentlest dogs, the ones that would never hurt anyone, and throwing them into that ring as bait. The warehouse door opened, and Tank pulled Sarah deeper into the shadows as his club brothers filed in. He recognized Crusher's bulk, heard Snake's distinctive laugh. His chest tightened as he watched men he'd called family for years disappear into the building where animals were being tortured for profit. "There's something else," Sarah whispered. "The police detective I've been working with thinks there's going to be a raid tonight. Someone tipped them off." Tank's mind raced. If the cops showed up and found him here with Sarah, it would look like he was the informant. His brothers would never forgive that kind of betrayal, regardless of his reasons. "You need to leave," he said firmly. "Get your evidence and go. I'll make sure Rex gets out alive. Tank, you can't go in there alone. If they figure out we're both here together, we're both dead." He turned to face her fully. "Sarah, these past few weeks with you and Charlie, they've shown me who I want to be. But right now, I need to be who I've always been. Just long enough to save that dog." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, still far off but getting closer. Sarah's eyes widened. The raid's starting early. Tank felt the familiar weight of his colors on his back, the Hell's Angels patch that had defined him for so many years. In a few minutes he'd have to choose between the brotherhood that had given him purpose and the conscience that a dying puppy had awakened. He thought of Charlie, safe at home, probably curled up on the couch waiting for him to return. He thought of Sarah, who'd risked everything to expose this cruelty. He thought of Rex, somewhere inside that warehouse, waiting to die for other people's entertainment. "Go," he told Sarah, his voice steady now. "Whatever happens next, make sure the story gets told." She nodded, squeezed his hand once, and melted back into the shadows. Tank Morrison walked toward the warehouse door, toward his brothers, toward a choice that would define the rest of his life. The veterinary clinic felt like foreign territory as Tank pushed through the glass doors, the small bundle in his arms drawing curious stares from the other pet owners in the waiting room. A woman with a pristine poodle actually clutched her purse tighter when she saw his colors, but Tank barely noticed. His entire focus was on the shallow, labored breathing of the puppy wrapped in his jacket. "I need help," he said to the receptionist, his voice rougher than usual. "Found this little guy in an alley. He's hurt bad." The young woman behind the counter took one look at the puppy and immediately pressed a button. "Dr. Chen, emergency in the lobby." She gestured toward an examination room. "Right this way." "What happened?" she asked, already moving toward the examination room. Tank followed, surprised by how gently she guided him. Dogfighting ring. This one didn't make it to the main event. He carefully placed the puppy on the metal table, watching as Dr. Chen's hands immediately began their assessment. Her jaw tightened as she examined the wounds. "This is deliberate. Training bait." She looked up at Tank with eyes that held both fury and sadness. "You said dogfighting ring?" "Yeah." Tank found himself studying her face as she worked. There was something calming about watching her hands move with such precision, such care. "You seen this before?" "More than I'd like." She was already preparing an four-line. "These operations are everywhere. Most people just look the other way." She glanced at him. "But you didn't." Tank shifted uncomfortably. Couldn't leave him there. Dr. Chen worked in focused silence for several minutes, cleaning wounds, administering pain medication, checking for internal injuries. Tank watched her face, the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, how her entire being seemed dedicated to saving this small life. "He's got broken ribs," multiple lacerations, severe dehydration, she said finally. But nothing that can't heal with time and care. He's lucky you found him when you did. Lucky, Tank repeated. Not a word I use much. She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her. Maybe it's time to start. She was updating a chart. I'll need to keep him here for a few days, monitor him closely. This kind of recovery takes patience. Tank nodded, then found himself saying, the ring, the one that did this. They're still operating. Dr. Chen's pen stopped moving. You know where? Working on it. He wasn't sure why he was telling her this. Guy named Rodrigo Vasquez runs it, connected to some serious people. I've heard that name. Her voice was quiet but intense. We've treated 3 dogs this month that I suspect came from his operations, all brought in by different people, all with similar injuries. She looked directly at Tank. If you're thinking of doing something about it, you should know you're not the first person to care. Before Tank could respond, his phone buzzed. Text from Skull. Church tonight. Mandatory. Big developments on the territory situation. Tank stared at the message, feeling the weight of 2 worlds pressing against each other. The club needed him. The brotherhood that had defined his adult life was calling. But looking at this small puppy breathing steadily on the examination table, at Dr. Chen's determined face, he felt something shifting inside his chest. I have to go, he said, but I'll be back. Tomorrow. Dr. Chen nodded. I'll be here. And Tank? She used his road name naturally, without fear. Thank you for bringing him in, for caring. Tank paused at the door. Doc, those other dogs you mentioned, the ones you suspect came from Vasquez, you got any records on who brought them in? She considered this carefully. I couldn't share medical records, but... She pulled out a business card, wrote something on the back. There's a coffee shop on 5th Street. I take my lunch break there most days around noon. Tank took the card, their fingers brushing briefly. Sarah, he read from the front. My friends call me Sarah. Walking back to his bike, Tank felt the night air differently than usual. The puppy would live. Dr. Chen, Sarah, cared about more than just one injured animal, and somewhere in the city, Vasquez was planning another fight night. His phone buzzed again. Skull, more insistent, where the hell are you? Tank swung his leg over the Harley, but before starting the engine, he looked back at the veterinary clinic. Through the window, he could see Sarah checking on other animals, the same gentle intensity she'd shown with the puppy. He started the bike and headed toward the clubhouse. But for the first time in years, Tank Morrison wasn't entirely sure where his loyalty should lie. The warehouse district felt different at 3 in the morning. Tank sat on his Harley in the shadows between 2 abandoned buildings, watching the loading dock where Danny's operation ran its midnight fights. The puppy, who he'd started calling Riot, was safe at home, finally eating solid food and gaining weight. But every time Tank looked into those trusting brown eyes, he thought about all the dogs who hadn't been so lucky. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya, still thinking about what you said. Be careful tonight. Movement caught his eye. A black SUV pulled up to the loading dock, followed by 2 more vehicles. Tank recognized some of the faces in the dim light. Club members, but also outsiders with serious money. The kind of people who bet 6 figures on blood sport and never got their own hands dirty. He pulled out his phone and started recording. If he was going to do this, he needed evidence. Real evidence that even the club couldn't ignore or cover up. The warehouse doors opened, spilling yellow light across the concrete. Tank could hear the crowd inside, the savage cheering that made his stomach turn. He'd been in plenty of fights himself, thrown punches for the club, done things he wasn't proud of. But those were choices made by men who knew the risks. This was different. Tank? What the hell are you doing here? He spun around to find Razor emerging from behind a shipping container, his face dark with suspicion. Tank's heart hammered as he pocketed his phone, hoping the recording was still running. Could ask you the same thing, Tank said, keeping his voice level. Thought you were handling business across town tonight. Plans changed. Razor's eyes narrowed. Danny said you've been asking questions, poking around where you shouldn't be. Just trying to understand the operation better, make sure we're covered legally." Razor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Since when do you give a shit about legal? You've broken more laws than a street junkie, Tank. What's really going on?" Tank could feel the weight of his phone in his pocket, the recording that could bring down Danny's entire network. He thought about Maya's words about doing the right thing, about the trust in Riot's eyes, about all the dogs who would die if this continued. "Maybe I'm getting old," Tank said. "Maybe I'm tired of watching things go too far." "Too far?" Razor stepped closer, his hand moving instinctively toward the knife on his belt. "Brother, you're starting to sound like you've lost your edge. Or your loyalty." The word hung between them like a challenge. Loyalty. It had been Tank's religion for 15 years, the code that governed every decision. But loyalty to what? To the brotherhood that had given him purpose, or to something deeper, something that said causing pain for entertainment was wrong, no matter who profited from it. "My loyalty's exactly where it's always been," Tank said carefully. "With the club. But Danny's operation isn't club business, is it? It's personal profit, built on something that could bring heat down on all of us." Razor's expression shifted slightly. Tank could see him processing the argument, recognizing the truth in it. Danny had always been careful to frame the dog fighting as separate from official club activities, which meant it wasn't protected by club rules about loyalty and silence. "You think I should walk away from my cut?" Razor asked. "From the money Danny's throwing around?" "I think we should all consider what happens when the feds start sniffing around animal cruelty operations," Tank said. "They use that shit to build RICO cases, take down entire organizations." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either, and Tank could see it resonating with Razor, who'd done time before and had no interest in going back. The crowd noise from the warehouse suddenly intensified, followed by angry shouting. Something had gone wrong inside. Razor's attention shifted toward the building, giving Tank the opening he needed. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble," Tank said, backing toward his bike. "Just wanted to see the operation for myself, make my own judgment about the risks." Razor nodded slowly, still distracted by whatever was happening inside. "Yeah, all right. But Tank, Danny's not going to like hearing you were here asking questions. Might be smart to have a conversation with him directly." "Clear the air." Tank swung his leg over his Harley, the engine rumbling to life. "Maybe I will." Tank's hands shook as he stared at the photographs spread across Mickey's kitchen table. The images were grainy but clear enough. Him entering the veterinary clinic, him walking Max in the park, him meeting with Detective Sarah Chen outside the courthouse. Mickey sat across from him, arms crossed, his weathered face a mask of disappointment and barely contained fury. 12 years, Tank. 12 goddamn years you've been my brother, and this is how you repay that loyalty?" Mickey's voice was dangerously quiet. "Working with the cops to bring down family." "It's not about bringing down family," Tank said, his voice hoarse. "It's about stopping something that's wrong. You've seen what Viper's operation does to those animals." "Animals!" Mickey slammed his fist on the table, making the photographs jump. "We're talking about animals while our brotherhood bleeds. 3 of our own got arrested last night because of information you fed to your cop girlfriend." Tank's jaw tightened. "Sarah's not my—" "Don't." Mickey held up a hand. "Just don't. I've got enough surveillance photos to wallpaper this kitchen. You think we're stupid? You think we don't know when one of our own has turned?" The weight of the cut on Tank's chest felt heavier than ever. The leather had been his second skin for over a decade, a symbol of belonging he'd never thought he'd want to remove. Now it felt like a noose tightening around his neck. "Where's Viper?" Tank asked. "Safe, away from your cop friends and their raid plans." Mickey leaned back in his chair. "You really thought we wouldn't figure it out? That we wouldn't notice the pattern? Every time you went sniffing around the fighting operation, something would go wrong for us a few days later." Tank thought about Max, probably wondering where he was right now. The dog had become his anchor to something pure in a world that had grown increasingly murky. Those animals were dying, Mickey, tortured for entertainment. How is that something we protect? Because it's family business. Mickey's composure finally cracked. Because when you wear that cut, you don't get to pick and choose which family operations align with your personal moral code. You swore an oath, Tank, blood in, blood out, no exceptions. I found a dying puppy, Tank said quietly. That's all. I found a dying puppy and couldn't walk away. And look where that got you. Mickey gestured at the photos. Look where that got all of us. The feds are breathing down our necks. Our drug operations are compromised and half the chapter thinks we've got a snitch problem. You do have a snitch problem. It's me. Mickey's face went pale. Jesus, Tank. Do you understand what you just admitted? Do you know what I have to do now? Tank stood slowly, his massive frame casting a shadow across the table. Yeah, I know. But I also know I can't live with what Viper's doing. Those dogs, Mickey, you should see what they do to them. What they turn them into. It's business. It's torture. Tank pulled his cut off and laid it carefully on the table next to the photographs. I'm done. Mickey stared at the leather vest like it was a dead body. You can't just walk away, brother. You know it doesn't work that way. Then don't let me walk away. Tank met his friend's eyes. Do what you have to do, but I won't be part of this anymore. The silence stretched between them. 12 years of brotherhood balanced on a knife's edge. Finally, Mickey reached into his jacket and pulled out a pistol, setting it on the table next to Tank's cut. Sit down, Mickey said, his voice flat. Tank remained standing. I need to go check on my dog. Your dog? Mickey laughed bitterly. That's what this all comes down to? A mutt you picked up in an alley? That mutt taught me something I'd forgotten, Tank said. What it means to protect something innocent. What it means to choose what's right over what's easy. Mickey picked up the gun, his finger resting alongside the trigger guard. And what about what you owe me? What you owe the club? Tank looked at his oldest friend, seeing the pain behind the anger. I'm sorry, Mickey. I truly am. But I can't be the man I used to be, not anymore. He turned toward the door, his back to Mickey and the gun. Each step felt like walking through quicksand, but he kept moving, waiting for the sound that might never let him reach Max again. Tank's hands trembled as he stared at the photographs spread across Detective Rodriguez's desk. Images of mangled dogs, makeshift fighting pits, and stacks of blood money painted a picture more horrific than anything he'd witnessed in 20 years with the Angels. But it was the final photograph that made his blood run cold. Marcus Vega shaking hands with Skull, the club's treasurer, outside the warehouse where Tank had first discovered the fighting ring. Your club's been laundering money through the operation for 8 months, Rodriguez said, her voice cutting through the silence. Every major fight, every betting pool, the Angels take 30%. Tank's world tilted. He thought of Diesel's nervous energy lately, the way conversations stopped when he entered rooms, the mysterious club business meetings he'd been excluded from. The pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. Diesel doesn't know, Tank said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Are you sure about that? Rodriguez leaned forward. Because according to our surveillance, your president met with Vega 3 times last month. The words hit Tank like a physical blow. He closed his eyes, seeing Diesel's face when he'd first brought Scout to the clubhouse, the way his old friend had smiled at the puppy's antics. Either Diesel was a better actor than Tank had ever imagined, or someone was playing a deeper game. Tank's phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, and Scout's fever broke. Doc says he's going to be okay. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by a fresh wave of determination. Scout had survived because Tank had chosen to save him. Now Tank had to make sure no other dog suffered the same fate. I need guarantees, Tank said, meeting Rodriguez's eyes. Sarah Chen walks away clean. No charges, no harassment. And Scout, when this is over, I want assurance that he's safe. Done. But Tank, once you agree to this, there's no going back. Your club will know it was you. Tank thought about the brotherhood that had defined his adult life. The men who'd stood by him through bar fights and police raids, through the death of his parents and the collapse of his marriage. The Angels had been his family when he had nothing else. But they'd also been funding the torture of innocent animals, and that changed everything. "What do you need me to do?" Rodriguez slid a small recording device across the desk. "Vega's planning something big for next week. A championship fight with six-figure betting. We need you to get close enough to record the details. Participants, location, money flow. Everything." Tank pocketed the device, its weight seeming far heavier than its actual size. "And then we shut them down. All of them." "Tank!" Diesel's voice carried forced cheer. "How's the mutt?" "Alive." Tank accepted a beer from Razor, studying his brothers' faces. "Thanks to Sarah." "Good, good." Diesel nodded absently. "Listen, brother, we need to talk. Private." They stepped outside onto the porch, where Tank had first cleaned Scout's wounds. The irony wasn't lost on him. "I'm going to ask you something," Diesel said, "and I need complete honesty. Have you been talking to the cops?" Tank's training as an enforcer kicked in. Never show weakness, never reveal your hand. "Why would you ask me that?" "Because Rodriguez has been sniffing around, asking questions about our finances, and the only thing that's changed lately is your crusade about those fighting dogs." "You think I'm a rat?" Tank let genuine hurt color his voice. Diesel studied him for a long moment. No, I don't. But Tank, you need to drop this dog-fighting thing. It's causing problems you don't understand." "What kind of problems?" "The kind that could get people hurt." Diesel's tone carried a warning. "We've got business relationships to maintain, complex ones. Your girlfriend's been asking too many questions, stirring up the wrong people." The threat against Sarah was subtle but unmistakable. Tank felt his jaw clench, but forced himself to nod. "I hear you." "Good." Diesel relaxed slightly. "Look, I get it. You care about the animals, but sometimes you have to pick your battles, brother. This isn't our fight." As Diesel headed back inside, Tank remained on the porch, staring at the spot where he'd first held Scout's broken body. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Sarah, this one a photo of Scout sleeping peacefully on a clean blanket, his wounds healing. Tank touched the recording device in his pocket. Maybe this wasn't the angel's fight, but it was his. And for the first time in his life, that distinction mattered more than brotherhood. "You sure about this, brother?" Diesel's voice carried a note of concern that he rarely showed. "Once we do this, there's no going back." Tank's jaw tightened as he surveyed the empty space where just days ago dogs had fought and died for the entertainment of monsters. Bloodstains still darkened the concrete in irregular patches, testament to the suffering that had taken place here. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The plan was simple in its brutality. They would hit Castellano's operation tonight while he was hosting his biggest fight of the season. Tank had fed him information about a supposed police raid scheduled for next week, forcing the crime boss to move his entire operation to a backup location, a location Tank had already shared with Detective Martinez. But first, they had their own business to settle. Heavy footsteps announced Viper's arrival before Tank saw him emerge from the shadows near the back entrance. The Angel's president moved with the predatory grace that had earned him his name, his cold eyes taking in the scene with calculating precision. "Hell of a thing you've done here, Tank," Viper said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years leading the club. "Burning bridges with profitable partnerships, making enemies of powerful men." He paused, studying Tank's face, all for a damn dog. "It was never about the dog," Tank replied, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his muscles. "It was about what we've become. What I've become." Viper's laugh was harsh, echoing off the warehouse walls. "What we've become? Brother, we've always been exactly what we are. Outlaws. Men who take what we want and destroy what stands in our way. That little mutt didn't change our nature, it just made you weak." The other angels shifted uncomfortably, sensing the electricity building between their president and their enforcer. Tank could feel their loyalty wavering, torn between the man who had led them for decades and the brother who had saved their lives more times than they could count. "Maybe," Tank said, taking a step forward, Or maybe it made me remember what it feels like to protect something innocent instead of destroying it. Viper's hand moved toward his weapon, but Tank was faster. The gun appeared in his grip with practiced ease, barrel leveled at his president's chest. Around them, leather whispered against metal as the other angels drew their own pieces, creating a deadly Mexican standoff in the blood-stained warehouse. "You drawing on your president, Tank?" Viper's voice remained calm, but his eyes blazed with fury. "That's a death sentence, and you know it." "Only if I'm still your brother when this is over," Tank replied. "And we both know I'm not." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Tank could hear his own heartbeat, could smell the fierce sweat and gun oil that permeated the air. One wrong move, one nervous trigger finger, and they would all die in this place of death and suffering. Diesel was the first to lower his weapon. "This is wrong, Viper. What Tank exposed, those weren't just dogfights. They were torturing animals for sport. That ain't what we're about." "The hell it isn't," Viper snarled. But Tank noticed that two more angels had lowered their guns. "We're criminals, not saints. We don't get to pick and choose which sins are acceptable." "Maybe not," Tank said, never taking his eyes off Viper. "But we get to choose who we want to be tomorrow." In the distance, sirens wailed through the night. Martinez and her team moving on Castellano's new location. Tank hoped they would be in time, hoped the information he had provided would be enough to end the nightmare once and for all. Viper heard the sirens too, and his face twisted with understanding. "You set him up. You played both sides and used the club to do it." "I used the club to do something right for once," Tank corrected. "To protect instead of destroy." The standoff continued for another heartbeat before Viper slowly holstered his weapon. The gesture sent a clear message to the remaining angels, who followed suit with obvious relief. "You're dead to us, Tank," Viper said, his voice heavy with finality. "Dead to the club, dead to the brotherhood. You walk out of here, you keep walking. We see you again, we finish this." Tank nodded, backing toward the exit while keeping his gun ready. "I can live with that." As he reached the doorway, Diesel called out. "Tank." When he turned, his old friend tossed something through the air, his angels cut, the leather worn smooth by years of loyalty and brotherhood. "Thought you might want to do the honors," Diesel said quietly. Tank caught the cut and walked into the night, leaving his old life bleeding on the warehouse floor behind him. The warehouse felt like a tomb when Tank and Riley arrived, the silence broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Detective Sarah Chen's unmarked sedan was already there, along with two patrol cars positioned strategically around the building's perimeter. Tank's hands trembled slightly as he cut the engine, the weight of what they were about to do settling heavy in his chest. "You don't have to go in there," Riley said softly, her hand finding his across the center console. "You've already done enough." Tank looked at her, memorizing the concern in her eyes, the way the streetlight caught the auburn highlights in her hair. 3 weeks ago he would have laughed at the idea that someone like her could care about someone like him. Now, her presence was the only thing keeping him anchored. "Yeah, I do," he said, squeezing her fingers. "This ends tonight." Chen approached as they climbed out of the truck, her expression grim. "Morrison, we've got thermal imaging showing at least 15 people inside, maybe more. Intel suggests Kozlov's running a fight tonight. Bigger crowd than usual." Tank nodded, his jaw clenched. Viktor Kozlov had been a shadow in his peripheral vision for months, a name whispered in the darkest corners of the club. Now Tank understood why. The Russian had been using Hell's Angels territory as cover for his operation, probably paying off key members to look the other way. Members like Viper. "What about the dogs?" Riley asked, her voice tight with worry. "Animal control standing by," Chen replied. "But we need to move fast. Once we breach, things are going to get chaotic." Tank pulled the wire from Chen's tech specialist, the small device feeling foreign against his skin. In 15 years with the Angels, he'd never imagined he'd be wearing a police wire. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who'd spent his life running from the law was now helping to uphold it. "Remember," Chen said as they reviewed the plan one final time. "We need Kozlov's voice on record making the deals. Without that, his lawyers will tear this apart." The sound hit them first as they approached the warehouse's side entrance, the roar of voices, the sick excitement that came with blood sport. Tank's stomach churned, thinking of all the animals that had suffered in that space, all the ones they might not be able to save tonight. Inside, the scene was worse than Tank had imagined. A makeshift arena dominated the center of the warehouse, surrounded by bleachers packed with spectators. Money changed hands openly as bets were placed on two pit bulls circling each other in the ring below. The dogs bore fresh wounds, their eyes wild with pain and confusion. Tank spotted Kozlov immediately, a tall, pale man in an expensive suit who looked obscenely out of place in the grimy warehouse. He stood beside the ring like a king surveying his domain, counting stacks of cash with manicured fingers. "Beautiful animals, yes?" a voice said behind Tank. He turned to find Viper approaching, a beer in one hand and a cigarette dangling from his lips. Tank's blood ran cold. If Viper was here, if he saw Tank with a wire— "Didn't expect to see you here," Tank said carefully, hyper-aware of the recording device against his chest. Viper's eyes narrowed slightly. "Could say the same about you, brother. Thought you'd gone soft since you started playing house with that veterinarian." The casual cruelty in Viper's voice, the way he dismissed Riley like she was nothing, sent rage coursing through Tank's veins, but he forced himself to stay calm, to play the part a little longer. "Just curious," Tank replied. "Heard there was good money to be made." "Oh, there is." Viper's grin was predatory. "Kozlov's been very generous to those of us who understand the value of discretion." In the ring, one of the dogs went down hard, its yelp of pain audible even over the crowd's roar. Tank's hands clenched into fists, every instinct screaming at him to intervene. But Chen's team needed more time to get into position. "How long has this been going on?" Tank asked, praying the wire was picking up everything. "Couple years now," Viper said, taking a long drag from his cigarette. "Started small, but Kozlov's got connections all up and down the coast. Ships in fighting dogs from Mexico breeds the best ones here. Even got some celebrities coming to the big events." Tank nodded, his heart hammering against his ribs. On the warehouse floor, Kozlov was shouting instructions to his handlers, his Russian accent thick as he coordinated the next fight. The man moved with casual authority, completely unaware that his empire was about to crumble. "Course, all good things come to an end," Viper continued, and something in his tone made Tank's blood freeze. "Especially when there's a rat in the house." Tank turned slowly, meeting Viper's knowing stare. The older biker's hand was already moving toward the gun at his waist. "Hello, Tank," Viper said softly. "Thanks for coming tonight. Made this so much easier." Tank's hands shook as he held the burner phone, Marcus's words echoing in his mind. The warehouse location burned into his memory like a brand. 48 hours. That's all they had before the fighting ring moved operations again, disappearing into the shadows for months. Scout whimpered from her bed in the corner, as if sensing the tension radiating from him. Her injuries had healed remarkably well, but she still favored her left front paw. The vet said she'd always have a slight limp, a permanent reminder of the cruelty she'd endured. The apartment door opened, and Sarah walked in carrying takeout bags. She took one look at his face and set the food down on the counter. "What happened?" Tank told her everything, about Marcus's call, the warehouse, the timeline. With each word, he watched her expression shift from concern to determination. "We have to do this," she said without hesitation. "Sarah, you don't understand what you're asking. These aren't just dogfighters, they're connected to the angels, my brothers." The word tasted bitter in his mouth now. "If I do this, there's no going back. They'll come for me, for us." She moved closer, her hand finding his cheek. "Look at her, Tank." She nodded toward Scout. "Look at what they did to her. How many others are suffering right now while we're standing here talking?" Tank closed his eyes, remembering the night he'd found Scout. How small and broken she'd been. How her trust had grown slowly, carefully, until she looked at him like he was her whole world. "The FBI will protect us," Sarah continued. "New identities, relocation? You'd give up everything? Your practice, your life here? For you, for her, for all the animals we could save?" Sarah's voice was steady, certain, in a heartbeat. The weight of her words settled over him. In 48 hours, he could end the nightmare that had haunted him since joining the Angels. But it would also end everything he'd known for the past 8 years. His phone buzzed. Jake's name flashed on the screen. "Church meeting tonight," Jake's gravelly voice announced when Tank answered. "Mandatory. We got business to discuss." Tank's blood ran cold. What kind of business? The kind that stays in the family. 8 o'clock. Don't be late. The line went dead. Tank stared at the phone, his mind racing. They knew. Somehow they'd figured out he was the leak. "I have to go," he told Sarah, grabbing his leather jacket. "Tank, wait. If I don't show up, they'll know for sure. I can buy us time, maybe throw them off the scent." Sarah grabbed his arm. "What if it's a trap? Then I'll deal with it." He kissed her forehead, breathing in her scent like it might be the last time. "If something happens to me, call Marcus. Tell him about the warehouse." Inside, the usual crowd had gathered. Jake sat at the head of the table, his cold eyes tracking Tank's movement as he took his seat. Spider lounged against the bar, cleaning his nails with a switchblade. The other members formed a loose circle, their faces unreadable. "We got a problem," Jake began without preamble. "Someone's been talking to the feds, sharing information about our business arrangements." Tank kept his expression neutral, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "What kind of information? The kind that could put us all in cages." Jake's smile was razor thin. "But here's the thing about rats, they always leave tracks." Spider stepped forward, his blade catching the overhead light. "Funny thing happened today. Had a conversation with one of our associates. Seems someone's been asking questions about our four-legged investments." The room grew deadly quiet. Tank could feel every eye on him, measuring, calculating. His hand instinctively moved toward the gun concealed beneath his jacket. "Now, I've been thinking," Jake continued, standing slowly. "Who among us has been acting strange lately? Who's been distant, distracted? Who's been spending time with people outside the family?" Tank's phone vibrated in his pocket. A text message. Under the table, he glanced at the screen. "Sarah, police outside your building. Get out. Now." His blood turned to ice. They hadn't just suspected him. They'd already made their move. "Something you want to share with the class, Tank?" Jake's voice cut through his panic. Tank looked up to find every gun in the room pointed at him. Jake's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "See, the thing about family," Jake said, his voice soft and deadly, "is that betrayal cuts the deepest, and family business always gets settled in-house." Tank's hand closed around his gun grip. Outside, he could hear the rumble of more motorcycles arriving. Reinforcements. They'd planned this carefully. Scout was safe with Sarah. That was all that mattered now. The warehouse district felt different in the pre-dawn darkness. Tank's Harley rumbled between empty buildings, his headlight cutting through shadows that seemed to hold their breath. Behind him, the sound of other engines followed. Not his brothers this time, but Detective Sarah Chen and her tactical team. The alliance still felt surreal, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. His phone buzzed against his chest. A text from Razor, "Last chance to walk away, brother. Meet us at the clubhouse. We'll figure this out." Tank's jaw tightened as he deleted the message without responding. In his jacket pocket, the flash drive containing weeks of gathered evidence felt heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried. Photographs of beaten dogs, financial records, names and dates, everything Chen needed to bring down the fighting ring that had corrupted his club from the inside. The abandoned meatpacking plant loomed ahead, its broken windows like dead eyes staring into the night. Tank killed his engine 2 blocks away and continued on foot, Chen's team spreading out through the shadows behind him. The plan was simple: get inside, document the fights in progress, and signal for the raid. Clean and surgical, Chen had promised. No unnecessary casualties. But Tank knew his brothers better than that. They wouldn't go quietly. The side entrance gaped open, just as Viper had said it would be. Tank slipped inside, the familiar stench of blood and fear hitting him like a physical blow. How many times had he stood in places like this, watching those brutal spectacles and telling himself it was just business? The memory of the dying puppy in the alley flashed through his mind. Those trusting brown eyes that had seen something in him worth saving. Voices echoed from the main floor. Tank moved through the corridor, his boots silent on the concrete despite his size. Through a gap in the boards, he could see the fighting pit surrounded by a crowd of spectators. Money changed hands in thick rolls. Two pit bulls circled each other in the center ring, their bodies scarred from previous battles. His stomach turned. This had to end tonight. Tank activated the recording device Chen had given him, then stepped into the main area. The crowd parted as they recognized him, some nodding with respect, others stepping back with obvious fear. At the far end of the pit, Viper stood counting money with two other club officers. When he spotted Tank, his face split into a predatory grin. "Well, well, look who decided to join us after all." Viper's voice carried across the noise. "Thought maybe you'd gone soft, Tank. All that time playing nursemaid to a mutt." "Just wanted to see what all the fuss was about," Tank replied, moving closer to the pit. The recording device captured everything, faces, voices, the savage scene below. Seems like good money. Better than good. Viper's eyes glittered in the harsh overhead lights. "This operation's been funding club activities for 2 years. Weapons, territory expansion, protection money, all of it flowing through these fights." Tank nodded, playing his part while his soul screamed in protest. "Smart business." One of the dogs went down hard, its leg bent at an unnatural angle. The crowd roared approval as the other animal was pulled away, panting and bleeding. Tank's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to remain still. Not yet. Chen needed more evidence, more names. "You know what the best part is?" Viper stepped closer, his breath reeking of whiskey and cigarettes. "We've got cops on the payroll too. Detective Morrison thinks he's so clean, but his partner's been feeding us information for months." Tank's blood went cold. Chen had mentioned her partner's suspicious behavior, but hearing it confirmed felt like a punch to the gut. How deep did this corruption run? "Speaking of cops," Viper continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "heard some interesting rumors about you lately, brother. Rumors about you talking to people you shouldn't be talking to." The warehouse fell silent, except for the sound of new dogs being brought to the pit. Tank met Viper's stare, seeing his own death reflected in those cold eyes. The game was up. "You're right," Tank said quietly. "I have been talking to people." Viper's hand moved toward his jacket, but Tank was faster. Years of street fighting exploded into motion as he grabbed Viper's wrist and twisted hard. The crack of breaking bone echoed through the warehouse, followed by Viper's scream of rage and pain. "Police! Nobody move!" Chen's voice boomed through megaphones as tactical lights flooded the building. The crowd scattered like roaches, but Tank barely noticed. He was focused on Viper, who had pulled a knife with his good hand and was slashing wildly. "You're a dead man, Tank," Viper snarled. "The club will hunt you to the ends of the earth." "Then I guess I better make this count," Tank replied, and charged forward into his past one final time. The courthouse steps felt like concrete mountains beneath Tank's boots as he emerged into the harsh afternoon sunlight. 3 months of testimony, evidence, and sleepless nights had finally culminated in this moment. Behind him, the heavy doors swung shut on Vincent Carrera's 25-year sentence and the dismantling of the largest dogfighting operation the state had ever seen. The media circus waited like vultures, cameras clicking and reporters shouting questions, but Tank's eyes found only one face in the crowd. Sarah stood by her veterinary clinic van, Rebel's carrier visible through the back window. The little pit bull had become the star witness in his own way, his scars telling a story that no amount of legal maneuvering could erase. "Tank!" Detective Martinez appeared at his elbow, her usually stern expression softened by something that might have been pride. "Hell of a thing you did in there." He nodded, unable to find words. The weight of his choices pressed down on him like a physical thing. 3 months ago, he'd been Vincent Tank Morrison, enforcer for the Devil's Disciples, a man whose reputation preceded him into every room. Now he was something else entirely, though he wasn't sure what. The crowd began to disperse as the initial excitement faded. Tank made his way toward Sarah, each step feeling like a decision. She smiled as he approached, but he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. Everything between them existed in this strange liminal space, built on shared purpose, but uncertain of its foundation. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Empty," he said honestly. "Like I've been holding my breath for months and finally let it out." She nodded, understanding flickering across her features. "The animals from the raids are all placed now. Rebel's officially yours, if you want him." Tank looked at the carrier where the small pit bull waited patiently. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd saved a dying puppy, and in return, that puppy had saved something in him he'd thought was long dead. "What about the club?" Sarah's question came quietly, but it cut through everything else. Tank had known this moment would come. The Devil's Disciples didn't forgive betrayal, even if it was dressed up as conscience. His testimony had taken down not just Carrera, but several club members who'd been involved in the operation. He'd burned bridges that had taken decades to build. "Got word this morning," he said. "I'm out, permanently." The words should have felt like a death sentence. The club had been his family, his identity, his entire world for over 15 years. Instead, he felt something lighter, like a burden he'd carried so long he'd forgotten its weight. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and he could tell she meant it. "Don't be." Tank reached into the carrier, letting Rebel sniff his fingers before gently lifting the dog out. The pit bull had filled out in the months since the raid, his coat glossy and his eyes bright with trust. "Some prices are worth paying." "So what now?" Sarah asked. Tank considered the question. He had money saved, enough to start over somewhere. He could disappear, reinvent himself completely. But as he looked at Sarah, at Rebel, at the life he'd accidentally built while trying to do the right thing, he realized he didn't want to run. "Martinez mentioned something about a job," he said. "Private security for a company that does animal rescue operations. Turns out having a reputation for violence can be useful when you're trying to protect instead of intimidate." Sarah's smile was radiant. "You'd be good at that." "Maybe." Tank scratched behind Rebel's ears, earning a contented sigh from the dog. "Won't be easy, starting over. People don't forget what you used to be." "No," Sarah agreed. "But they can learn to see what you've become." As they walked toward her van, Tank felt the weight of his past and the uncertainty of his future balanced against this moment of quiet peace. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of redemption, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Vincent Morrison felt something that might have been hope. Rebel settled against his chest, warm and trusting, a living reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change everything. Tank had learned what it meant to be human again, and he'd learned it from a dying puppy in an alley who'd needed someone to care. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but his own. And that, Tank thought as Sarah's hand found his, was enough.